Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to the library tour of doom. Not just any ordinary old library tour, but a library tour of all of my books, one book at a time. And not just all the books I have in my library right now, but all the books I ever have had in my library. So it's going to be a while. Many, many years, perhaps many, many decades, perhaps measured in the lifetimes of BookTube watchers. And today we are continuing on with a little strand that I'm doing here of books that I'm showing you that I don't have in my library at the moment. Got to remember to mix those in because I've cycled through far more books than I currently own. Despite the fact that you see me doing book hauls at the drop of a hat on this channel, I actually have far fewer books now than I've had in an enormous amount of time. And I mean to, I haul lots and lots of books from the Brattle Bookshop and elsewhere. But the goal is always sort of attritional. The goal is always you haul all of those things and then you decide, at least then I decide whether or not it's a keeper. And if it's not, I have an easy avenue to get rid of it. And I do that on a regular basis. So I am not one of those, for instance, those used book shoppers who is trying to make the decision at the point of purchase in the shop as to whether or not something is a keeper. I just sort of scoop things up that are of interest or that may be keepers, and then I decide later on. So that process is ongoing. But there are far more books that are in my book journals than are in my current possession. I thought we'd go through one of those today. We'd hark all the way back to the 1980s, 1988, I believe, when all the world made sense. And this is a book that some of you will know, but not from the book, probably from TV. This is William Brinkley's novel, The Last Ship. And this is his story of a U.S. warship that does its tiny bit in a giant thermonuclear exchange, and then finds itself isolated as it quickly becomes apparent that the war escalated and eventually encompassed the whole world. So there's almost nobody else alive. We meet a couple of other groups of humans, but civilization is gone. Not just American civilization and Soviet Russia civilization, but all civilization. So the ship really becomes a kind of an island of humanity at sea. There's a little more than 150 men and fewer than 30 women, and once it becomes obvious to the captain and to the crew that catastrophe has struck, suddenly that ratio takes on a kind of post-Noah's Ark aspect. Suddenly, it's actually not sudden. One of the gigantic Achilles heels of this book, there are many, but one of them is that the author simply does not understand that women are human beings. To him, he may worship them or elevate them on a platform or be extra courteous to them, or chivalry, I believe, is the umbrella under which many men hide this kind of inability. But fundamentally, he just cannot believe, William Brinkley just cannot believe that they are human. So when a catastrophe looks like it's the end of the world, they go from being crew members on this vessel to being broodstock pretty quick. That is the implication, is that we no longer have to think about what the various survival expertise skills of the people involved here are. Instead, we have to think about bearing children. and floating above the book, but not very far above the book, is that need not be completely voluntary. So that's an Achilles heel of this novel, and another Achilles heel is the way it's written. It is impenetrably written. Just kind of weird, because this author had a long history in writing clearly, in putting a high premium on that, even a monetary premium on that. This was, I think, one of his last books, and it's verbose is putting it mildly. I think that, like a lot of people, like a lot of men, like a lot of retired military men or wannabe retired military men, Brinkley looked at the stratospheric success of the early part of Tom Clancy's career and thought, okay, the writing quality isn't a factor here, because Clancy is a terrible writer. Instead, what is a factor here is heavily marmaladed in misogyny, sexism, but also lots and lots of technicality, lots and lots of techno-jarble, and maybe a kind of pseudo old man admiral in the captain's quarters, sitting back in the easy chair, telling the terrified midshipmen's stories. That kind of voice, that kind of... I know every single thing about every single thing that has ever existed in the whole universe, and I'll tell you stories now and then. I've met some of those captains, some of those retired captains, and they're universally boot heel stupid. They haven't read anything. They don't know anything. The one female that they might be willing to grant a tiny amount of agency is their wife, but the wife walks behind them and carries the luggage. And the last one that I met was in right around the time this book came out. I think it was in 1989. 1989, not 1899, but 1989. Her wife walked behind him, carried his luggage, literally, and her checkbook was his. It was his checkbook. She had to ask him for a check, and it was Mrs. So-and-so, no name of hers, no identity of hers. And, not to overly vilify him, but because she didn't see anything wrong with that either. But that was the way of the American Armed Forces for a long time. I don't know if it still is. But one way or another, you get that world in this book. You get the book's strong point, which you're going to be able to tell right from my admittedly threadbare description of the plot, which is that it's a hell of a gimmick. It's a warship isolated at sea because nuclear war has taken out everybody else. That's a hell of a gimmick. That's a hell of a premise. And it works. For me, I'm sure for lots of other people, this was a page-turner. Believe it or not, even though the prose is terrible, and even though a lot of the attitudes and assumptions lurking just under the surface aren't all that attractive, it's still such a great, what happens next idea that I just kept reading. And then years and years later, decades and decades later, I think 20 years later, maybe more than that, I reread it. And I wasn't embarrassed. The parts of it that hold up still hold up. It's just, let's just say, I doubt I would ever give it a third read. I doubt I would ever do that. And, I suppose now that the TV show has come out, and the TV show had some fans, the TV show was the last ship, and it was the same killer gimmick, a warship cut adrift at sea in all not nautically, but in all the effectual ways. If I remember correctly, the TV show changed some of the basics, including the overarching dramatic event, which is not nuclear war but a virus. So I don't know what watching The Last Ship, the TV show, now would feel like, now that we've had a worldwide pandemic. And the TV series did what film adaptations of literary works always do, which is improve them. Just totally improve them. The flat one-dimensional characters, there are no two-dimensional characters or even three-dimensional characters in this book. They're all given much more reality, much more texture. There's slightly better dialogue. Brinkley's pretty good with dialogue, but even so, the Last Ship, the TV show, has room to move, granted, that a book doesn't have, but does virtually everything better. The dramatic points are more dramatic. The emotional resonances, there are virtually none in this book. They are all more present in the series, but it's drastically different. It is not a dramatization of this book in any way. So, except for that killer premise of a ship suddenly lost, suddenly without a support structure. So if that premise appeals to you, well, you've got this book to read. I don't think it's in print anymore. I don't think it's ever going to be in print again, but you could find a copy. And there's also the TV show to watch, which has that premise, but dispenses with a lot of the creaking archaisms of this book. So it's up to you. Not every entry in the Library Tour of Doom will be a recommend. This is, I guess, a recommend to diehard fans of military fiction. This is a pretty good example of military fiction. So, it doesn't, God forbid that I would ever give, for instance, Neville Shute credit for any kind of literary ability, but he wrote a book that many critics compared this one to. He wrote a book called On the Beach, in which there is an isolated community, but it's not on the ocean, it's on land, on the coast of Australia, that knows that a full-scale thermonuclear exchange has happened and that the rest of the world is dead, and they know that they're the last holdouts. And Neville Shute, he does a better job than this. I don't think that William Brinkley was in complete control of his faculties when he wrote this. I think if he had written it when he was, it might have been a much stronger book. And there's also one of the elements in On the Beach by Neville Shute uh, that's very present isn't oddly enough present enough in this book, I think, which is that that's an illusion. And even when these books were written, even the writers and certainly every scientist in the world knew that that was an illusion. There will be no long-term salvation. If there's a full-scale thermonuclear exchange, especially one big enough to wipe out cities, civilizations, all pockets of people, then it doesn't matter if you're floating on the deep blue sea. You're still going to die. You're still going to die of radiation poisoning. It's not. It might take a little longer, but you're not thinking, as so many of the allusions in this book are, to rebuilding humanity. Humanity is still doomed. And in On the Beach, that's a little more clear. We'll be getting to On the Beach on this library tour of doom. And I guess while I'm talking about it, I should mention that just as the TV show adaptation of The Last Ship is so much better than the book, the movie adaptation of On the Beach is brilliant. Just brilliant. It beats the Neville Shute's slodgy and dumb book hollow. So I guess I'm sort of backhand recommending 2 televised productions instead of 2 books. One way or another, that's your library tour of doom for today. I think for the rest of the week, I will continue with books that I don't own a copy of, just to balance things out, and then we'll bounce around, or maybe I won't. Who knows? I will. In any case, stop this for now. This is a pure example of what I always refer to as stage side seat at the roadshow production of Waiting for Godot's Wi-Fi, because it's pouring rain here in Boston, and when it's pouring rain, my Wi-Fi tends to go to Boca Raton to wait it out. So I'm making videos today, but I don't know that they're going to upload at all, one way or another. Well, we can hope. We can hope for a window. I need a window anyway because a certain someone is absolutely not, N-O-T, going to go outside if it is actively raining. And she's too small to use the toilet. So I'm hoping for a break in the rain. Anyway, I will continue the library tour of doom tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.